Oh, someone else shared the study about bioreactors and different sizes, and I haven't had a chance to read it. Nick was able to uh, browse it a little bit. But I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to share about that or any thoughts that you had on those bioreactors that you wanted to share before we got started on other topics. Um, like I said, I haven't read it myself.
No, bioreactor is really simple because they talk about bioreactor in Paulo Campos group, Loas Bean. They use a lot of this bioreactor and other technological. They use a lot of this. No, this
Mm-hmm.
is the moment of this engineering coffee. No, I say that I don't know about the bioreactor. I know about the process, the processing they use in this strange Colombian coffee. No, there are some video about this. No, they use a modified bioreactor, modern, the photo that I post on the group, because it is a old style model of the beer reactor that I post is very
Fancy.
now the see, yes, they are more modern size.
And you said there's videos of how they use them. Are these videos on YouTube?
There is no, there is because I want to know about Diego Bermudez process. Diego is very shy about the condivision of the process.
Yeah.
And one day, two years ago, one year and a half, Campos make a video with the famous drip the coffee. I probably also you was in connection with the drip the coffee. By the drip is a USA group podcaster. And make this podcast very long, about 1 hour, when he explain completely the process. We talk also with you in the group about the first phase, the oxidation, after the mosto, and they use this bioreactor, different, especially for the mosto phase. They use bioreactor is a word that meaning nothing for
Mm-hmm.
me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't see one of these, but bioreactor is a reactor with a probe that permit you to connect with the inside. This is the idea for me. I'm not a producer. I know by Carlos that they use this bioreactor with a probe and the possibility to connect with the inside. They mix, they change the pressure, they change the temperature, they move the beings of the completely engineering the most phase. This is what I know from this video, that for me is like a Bible in my mind. Now this is a very explaining video about the famous Colombian competition coffee. This is what I know. And bioreactor is one of these technical items that they use. What do you
Yeah.
think about this?
Well, I think that I have been very against them because I feel like they're not really helping the industry in general. And I agree with you that for me, a bioreactor, or not just for me, sorry, for if we're talking about science, a bioreactor is any like contained vessel. So you can do a bioreactor in a plastic barrel and put a valve on it. You can do a bioreactor in a bucket. So it's a lot more marketing to make it seem really fancy and say you have to buy this piece of equipment and this will make your coffee better. And I think it can help make coffee better, but it's making a lot of producers feel like they can't participate in coffee. They're saying, well, I don't have the money to buy a bioreactor, so I must not have specialty coffee. And I think that that is very sad for a lot of producers who feel like they're not part of the club or they can't be part of the club. And I feel like there's more damage for that than the benefit that you get from, oh, maybe we'll get a little better coffee. So I'm always thinking about it in the broader sense of how can more people participate in specialty? How can more people be included in the group? And these types of tools make it even more exclusive. Less people can afford them. Less people know how to use them.
Is the club also the of the geisha and the sidra club and other special variety? There are many club in the coffee.
Yeah.
There is the club of the super fancy process. There are many club, and now I'm a friend of mine giving me a coffee from Leicester Naso and say, oh, super, because after some time you taste this kind of coffee and you feel as you write in your post, no, rather I don't know, tired of this super fancy, incredible. Oh no, I want to return to be normal.
Yeah, and I think that's the
Eh,
trend too for producers is that there's also a little bit of a lie that if you get to this really specialty coffee that you're going to achieve some level. But as we've seen in the customers, that you kind of get saturated. It's like you smell like a really strong perfume and then you just need a break. Like you get overly saturated and you want to go like clear your palate. I think a lot of times people even say that like I need like a palate cleanser, I need like a classic coffee and then maybe you can go back to that. So for me, I'm telling producers again, not obviously the Colombian producers, the Panama producers that have the money, that have the time, do that. That's great.
I
Yeah.
say there are two group
Yeah.
of style from Panama and Colombia. For me, this there are two level of fancy situation. But sorry that I said only one thing. That I stop talking because I don't want to cover the scene of the of the group. But I live I make a lot of tourism in the European coffee, also Italy, but especially European cafe, specialty coffee. For it's 10 years that I go around for tourism in specialty coffee. And I have a lot of friends who work in this cafe and this situation. And this strange coffee is the beginning for the people to enter in the specialty coffee. No, to
Yeah.
it's more easy for the people that don't know coffee that are used that are used to drink a commercial coffee to enter in the specialty coffee with this slap in the face, you know, punch in the face, as you say,
Yeah.
of strange, super strange, fake, fermented, engineering. What do you want? No, that's super strange coffee, and the people connect with the new style of coffee because it's not the commercial style; it's different, and it's trying to want, especially want to improve the connection with the new world of coffee. This is the enter ticket, no?
Yeah.
But so strange that you leave this world immediately after one, two, three times that you taste this coffee. You decide to improve your experience. This is the but is the enter ticket for
Yeah.
me and for other friend. Is not to criticize because they have a lot of problems. It's difficult, but it's a part of the game. It's a part of the game
It
for
is.
me.
And I agree. And I just wanted to reset for the group. If you're just joining us, we're talking about bioreactors, and there is a research paper that's been shared in the comments. And my feelings about the bioreactors and what we've been sharing is that they are helpful in the industry in terms of getting much needed research, getting much needed upgrades of equipment. I'm really glad that people are paying attention to coffee more, but at the same time, what's happening is that it can be really disenfranchising and really frustrating for smaller producers who feel like that's what it means to be specialty. The only thing that makes my coffee specialty is if I plant specific varieties. The only way I can participate is if I have a bioreactor. The only way I can actually believe, like someone will
And
believe me that I have specialty coffee is if I do an anaerobic fermentation for 400 hours. And it's creating this like really high bar for people. And for me, that feels frustrating because it's very exclusive. Like in terms of exclusivity is like part of quality for some people, but I think exclusivity is bad because it means less people participate, less people get to have the economic benefit. And by people, I mean producers. Fewer producers get to have an economic benefit of part of specialty. And so that was the first part of the conversation. And now we're talking about there's the equipment, there's like the setup, and then there's the result of that setup. And the result being funky coffees, really extreme flavors, really like dramatic acidity levels, like just really different coffees. And what Paolo was sharing was that as a consumer and for his consumer friends, like these coffees are a gateway. These coffees are they're valuable in the industry to get new people hooked, to get their attention, to say, hey, coffee's not this, burnt rubber, caffeine vehicle that you've maybe always thought of. Coffee can be something else. And so they play an important role in getting somebody to like wake up and say, hey, this is coffee too. And that's really helpful because, again, we want inclusivity. We want more people to drink better coffee. We want more people to value coffee. But and so then I think producers kind of get this feedback of this is what consumers want. You should be making funky coffees. But we don't get to close the loop. Like people kind of stop there, like they stop the movie halfway through and then they go try to make crazy funky coffees. And if you play the movie the rest of the way, the other thing that he's sharing, and that's also been my experience, is that you get tired of these coffees pretty quickly. This is not a customer that you can hook one time with these funky coffees and then they stay that type of customer the whole time. A lot of times they graduate out of that. They say, okay, now I want something a little bit more classic, something a little bit more balanced. And they start to have the other coffees anyway. And so it's kind of like a thing to get people through the door, but then they quickly graduate out of it. And what I'm seeing is that producers invest in bioreactors, invest in all of these ingredients in making their coffee differently. And that takes a lot of time and effort, and you only have one harvest per year. So that's your whole thing for a year, but people can get bored in like 2 drinks. You try it once, okay, that's interesting. You try it again, and maybe by the 3rd time, you're like, all right, I want something different. I want something classic now. And so there's a mismatch between how fast the fashion is happening, how fast the fashion is like changing of what consumers are asking for, and then how quickly producers can respond because it's agriculture. It takes years to plant a new variety like a geisha or a sidra or a bourbon, and it takes a whole harvest to get your coffee. And so we're asking, like, I think consumers aren't realizing the burden of having all of these whims of, I want cherry flavor, I want this type of flavor, and then producers just can't respond. So I think that's my point in kind of bringing this up, is that there's a lot of positive, a lot of positive momentum in getting more innovation in coffee and putting money into better equipment and research, but there's not enough people examining the consequences of those things. There's a lot of people that just think, infinite growth is great and more is more, and, pumping in more engineering and more technology. But my argument is that that's not what's been missing from coffee. It's not that coffee doesn't have enough engineering and bioreactors, and that's why it's not, well compensated. The reason why coffee's not been well compensated is because like the political structures, the economic structures, the cultural divides, like there's so many bigger reasons why coffee is where it is that I don't think the bioreactor or even the microbes or the yeast are going to, swoop in and save us. So that is my long rant. So I just see Jamie, you turned on your camera, so I'll let you have the microphone. Welcome.
Yeah, sorry, the car has the nose off view. Um, But it's just such an interesting conversation that you're having. And I know I'm just joining, but it's something I've been thinking about as well is like when funky coffees or like co-ferments or these coffees that taste obviously different from like the standard coffee that people are used to. If people associate that with specialty coffee, then they're willing to pay more for it because it's obviously different from what they're used to. And then how much that does or doesn't translate to people then realizing, oh, I should be paying more actually for all of my coffee. And I think that's where I write like a newsletter about coffee. I'm also related to a roaster in UK. So this is just something I'm thinking about a lot sort of this month is like, how do you then take that extra step of like, okay, you're sick of these funky coffees, you want something clean, but like you also should be paying more for that because the producer also has to like has all these inputs. It's difficult to produce. There are all these other issues. The supply chain is broken. Like all of these things we talk about a lot. Um, More of just like a reflection. I'm
No,
curious your thoughts about that as well. That's
yeah,
like a
that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that that is another part that is missing is that we can see like half the movie and then we kind of stop it there and then go off and do more of the same instead of playing it all the way out. And so what Jamie is sharing is that there is this need for coffee to be better compensated. A lot of people are not living well on the production side. They're not meeting their cost of production. They're not covering, education for their children, savings, things like that. Also difficult to buy better equipment and reinvest in irrigation, things that would make the farm, more viable because the margins are so razor thin and a lot of producers are operating at a at a deficit. And so the concept was, well, specialty will save coffee because if we can get people to pay more money for coffee because it's not commodity, because it's not anonymous, then the money will trickle back. And so I think there's been such a strong push. And I think that it has not like bared out. It's been kind of a lie that specialty is really having as much of an impact as we think. It's like a very loud minority. And then we have the situation where we have some coffee is better compensated. Okay, I'm going to pay $7 a pound, $15 a pound for this funky anaerobic or hydro honey or carbonic maceration, something. And then again, like she's saying, people sort of get saturated and you're like, okay, now I just want a balanced coffee. But it takes as much or more effort to make a very classic balanced coffee. And then the money's not there for that. And that coffee should also be compensated at those rates. So you're almost in an attempt to help training people to then not value that coffee. Like I don't see that translating. I don't see people then wanting to pay more for these more classic profiles. And it's a very like it's just so sad because it's like such good intentions. Of course people want to help and get better coffees and get better prices, but what I'm seeing is like it's not working. And people are like, yeah, but it's a good idea, it should work. And I'm like, I know it should on paper, great, but in real life over decades it's actually not bearing out. And I don't see enough people kind of stopping to say, okay, it's not working, what else can we do? I just see more of this like doubling down of like, well, maybe it's not working because we didn't do it good enough. Let's double down and do it more and make even funkier coffee and have more equipment and bioreactors and more like justification for why you should pay for these coffees. And my prediction is that we're just going to be, running directly into a wall. But I see another camera on. So it says flag. Is that is that right?
Yeah, it is. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I'm at UC Davis, by the way, and
Go Aggies.
yeah. So I love your podcast series, and I had a question with episodes like 24 and 26, 15, kind of a ways back about. You said that um, esters, move with diasporas. This is kind of a theoretical but a sciencey question, and I feel like I don't know. I'd love to just hear your thoughts. So how you talk about. I just loved how you talked about yeasts really being
Human
a part of the
population.
microbial
Yeah.
human population drifts, and I was wondering if you could expand more on the kind of mechanisms by which those yeast cultures follow particular social groups. Like you said that they move north and south in the Americas. I suppose that's because that's the direction of most people. But like, how do they follow? What are the actual, like ways in which is that like people are carrying beans, or are they carrying microbial cultures and the other foods that they also carry? And then those kind of inhabit the coffees that they grow. And I'm curious.
Sure, sure. And sorry, your name?
Flag?
Oh, it is Flag.
Yeah,
Okay.
Miller. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So the question originates, if you guys aren't familiar with those earlier episodes, if you just kind of came in on the later ones, is talking about the origin of microbes and how so many people in specialty coffee really want to focus on terroir. And like, again, it's coming from a good place of trying to make coffee more valuable and get people to pay attention and pay for it. But we're not admitting the like unintended consequences, the other side of that. And part of that is a way to give coffee value was terroir, which is the land, and making things really pure. And so it led to a backlash, a resistance, a reaction against microbes and inoculation, and people really seeking like the pure expression of the land and like really minimal processing, really minimal any inputs as a way to value coffee, which again is a good idea. But what happens is that really erases a lot of the history, and it also is incorrect. It's factually incorrect because microbes are very necessary for processing coffee. Microbes are what metabolize the mucilage, what clean the coffee that allows it to be dried and shipped all over the world. And so this really important part of processing is either downplayed or ignored or demonized and said, you should only use nature's microbes. And so I made that episode based on Amy Dudley's research in the University of Washington because it looks at where are these yeast even coming from. And what they thought they would find in this research is that the yeast are specific of a product. So they were looking at coffee and cacao and grapes. And they were saying, okay, yeast, there's special yeast for cacao and there's different yeast for coffee. And that's what they thought that they would find, that there would be a specialized match between the yeast and the product. But what they actually found, which surprised them, was that it really didn't have to do with the product. It had to do with the location, that there are these different yeasts that were located in these countries, and that a cacao and a coffee from Colombia were more similar than in their yeast fingerprint than a cacao from Colombia and a cacao from Ghana. And what this meant was that the location was important, but when they looked further into like how these yeasts got there and traveled, they found that they really mimicked the migration patterns of humans. So humans coming from like the labor force coming from Africa into Latin America, and then again the way that coffee and cacao have kind of switched, where cacao is really a Colombian, Latin American Colombian crop, but most of it now is grown in Africa. So we've taken it from one place, and now 70% of the world cacao comes from Africa. And then opposite, coffee was, the motherland in Africa, and now most of it is grown in Brazil and outside of its original location. And so they, can map that swap, and we can see that people have been the ones that have carried a lot of these microbes, because when new varieties are taken to newer countries, they don't always bring their microbes with them, mostly because you also want like a sterile sample, but people aren't sterile. And because these crops, cacao and coffee, are so labor intensive and they have to be hand picked, you can imagine that, as humans, we carry a lot of microbes on our skin. We have our microbiome. And so as people are picking the coffee and picking the cacao and like being very tactile with these products, we're sharing our microbiome as humans with the plants. And then also, as Flag was saying, there's another way. So there's one way that I think we're carrying it on our skin and our hand and picking all these fruits. And also with our food, as people were moving around, they were bringing their own tortillas and their own kind of cultural foods. And then that was also inoculating the environment. So that's only to share that things are not as like borders are arbitrary, and things are much more fluid, especially in microbiology. There's more things that we can share, humans and crops, and back and forth and with each other. And I was making that episode to show that we can't ignore this part of coffee processing, and that it is both part of terroir is the people that have been interacting with these crops and the microbes that the people are sharing with these crops. And it's not just about how many days of sunlight or what is the clay versus sand composition of the soil, which is what a lot of people that want to focus on terroir want to talk about. They want to talk about climate and they want to talk about soil composition, but a lot of times they don't want to talk about people, as if people don't matter. And with coffee, maybe with other crops there's a lot less intervention, but with coffee it's an incredibly human effort to make it. So Flag, I don't know if that was along the lines of what you were curious about, or that was kind of just like a resetting for the group, if there was something like more specific.
Yeah, that was an amazing summary. Yeah, thank you so much. And it gives, that kind of, I would love some episode, like if it gets in your mind as to, hey, there's more here that I could talk about. I would love to hear you just talk more about like Amy Dudley's research and how, the particular ways in which given communities who are coffee producers, have like whether particular yeast strains or ester strains can be tracked to, the cultural habits of handling and health and those kinds of things that then end up making an impact on coffee. But that's anyway. Thank you, and others might have questions.
Cool. No, thank you. And you're right. I've been focusing on the newer episodes a little bit more on like philosophy and like how we're looking at coffee. And it's been a while since I've done like a really sciencey episode. So I would love to check back in with Amy Dudley and see what her new research is, because that is pretty old research. But you made me think of one more thing about how humans are sharing our microbiome with the crops that we're growing and picking and interacting with. And one of that is that, especially with cacao, but also a little bit with coffee, we know we have this mucilage layer and that microbes are used to break that down. But I was told stories of my dad in Guatemala when he was younger, that he, as like a kid, would get like kind of paid to like they would chew on the cacao fruit to get the seed out. And so they were using kind of like human like you're using your mouth to like consume that part of the fruit and then spit out the seed, and then that seed could be dried and turned into cacao. And I've heard that also a little bit with coffee as well, is using the way that civet coffee uses the animal's digestive tract to remove the mucilage and change that coffee and have a specific flavor. Humans were not digesting and pooping it out, but they were, kind of consuming it in their mouth, chewing it up, and then spitting out the seeds. So I think there's many ways that we are sharing our microbes with coffee.
Yeah, that's a really cool story.
Awesome.
I know. Anyway,
So
others might have questions. Thank you.
I will ask you, where are you in Davis? What do you do?
Yeah, so I am a professor in the Religion, Culture, and Society department, also the Middle East South Asia program, and I do work. I've done a lot of work as an anthropologist in Yemen in the 90s, and it's a war now, so it's hard to get back. But I'm now doing work about Yemeni diasporas in South Africa, and I'm focusing on coffee and shared coffee collective histories. And I'm kind of writing a book about like the history of Muslims' involvement in the coffee trade and like religion as kind of one of the mediators, the ways in which like producers and growers managed coffee ethically and sustainably. So Yemen did that for centuries before Europeans even discovered coffee. I mean, like 400 or 500 years they had. And then once in the 17th century, Europeans, the Dutch and British started, taking the beans and moving them to Java, et cetera. Yemenis continued to market it. So there's a whole history there, and it links up with a lot of what I'm doing now with communities in South Africa. So yeah, that's a big project, and so I've been really interested in your podcast series just because they get into so those questions like of those microbial cultures that are so often left out, and So anyway, that's a nutshell.
That's amazing. And I think that, I mean, it may be a little less relevant to your work or to that coffee just because most of that coffee was processed as a dry process, a natural process, not having
Mhm.
the pulp is exposed. So it may be a little bit
Mhm.
harder to follow the microbes on dry process coffee. I mostly talk about wet process, pulled coffee in Latin America, which again is like, it's just like juicier and richer and attracts more microbes. So I think it may be a little bit easier to track some of these changes. But I'm curious if you have gotten to the part or gotten to this point of knowing or seeing like the impact of kind of the traditional way to process coffee, and then when outsiders came in and were observing this process and saying, "Oh, let's take this to other places." Like, how did
Right.
coffee processing change in Yemen with like the outsider perspective, and then kind of like when they started to spread to new countries, like
Yeah.
what did they bring with them and maybe what they forgot to bring?
Yeah, I mean, part of the story, I think, is, so the ways in which Europeans produced like the early techniques that led to industrial production. So, you know, um, one of the key moments I think I'm interested in telling is partly Ceylon in the 19th century, where Roya Himalaya vastatrix really became a global epidemic through spores that emerged from the coffee plantations in Ceylon, where British were using different techniques than the Dutch had used in Southeast Asia, as I understand, just like a lot more aggressive farming plantations. And and so that was a major kickback on the health of coffee. And just I loved how in your episode, and it really cued me to like coffee's indigenous microbial homelands in Ethiopia in the forests, and that rust and coffee coexist together, I guess, and have done for centuries, so that they're not incompatible in those forests because coffee has the microbial support to be able to live with rust. And but once it's moved out of that, and then that becomes a problem. Yemen was okay because of its height and its dryness, and but once it was moved out of Yemen, then it starts to face those troubles. So I think, yeah, I'm interested in how, yeah. So there's a range of different kind of like stories about that, but a lot of the things that I've left out is that when the Europeans brought coffee to Southeast Asia, um, Muslims and indigenous Javanese and Sumatrans, they remained both growers and producers and traders. So like 50%, like a lot of the population in Java in the 17th century, in the 18th century, were growing it and not just selling it to, um, or just being forced to sell it to Europeans. They would try to impose monopolies, but people were quite clever, and they managed to kind of continue to thrive and grow coffee in sustainable ways. So yeah. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and it brings up something that I think is really not often talked about. And you brought it up in a perfect way about Roya and how this fungus and coffee have coexisted. And when the plant is healthy enough and it has its, immune system, its microbial defense, they can cohabitate
Hmm.
and there is harmony. But when we remove the coffee, when we remove the plant from its protective environment and we're trying to put it in other places, it is at a deficit. It is weaker, and so it is more susceptible to these attacks. And one of the, I think, like a bit of a paradigm shift that a lot of people I think could benefit from making is thinking about coffee and saying like they think my coffee is sick because it has this disease, like the insect, the pest came in or the fungus came in and made my plant sick, instead of thinking, no, these things, these pests or these fungus were attracted because my plant was already sick. It was already compromised, and that is like a billboard that brought it. It's not that they were perfectly healthy and then this external thing came in. And I think it's also remembering that Roya is a fungus, and as there's just like really creepy, crazy. Can you pull up the fungus eat? There's like this really weird internet video that shows like live fungus eat dead people and live people eat dead fungus. So like we eat mushrooms, and the idea that like they're not our competition. I'm gonna have Nick put it in the chat.
Interesting.
So like,
Nice.
the things that we want to eat are alive and healthy. The things that the fungus wants to eat are dead and decomposing. And so they are not our direct competition. If the Roya is attacking the coffee, it is already on its way to death. It is already compromised. It is not a healthy thing. And so having that view is not we need to attack the fungus. It's more like we need to make our plants more resilient so that they're not attracting this fungus. So this is the work of, I think it's Paul Dijkstra, and the concept of getting the plants healthy enough so that they don't attract pests and diseases is really interesting. So thanks for bringing that up. That's really fun.
Sorry.
No worries. So yeah, if anybody else wants to mention anything, I will. There's one thing I do have pending for Bert, which was he had asked me. He couldn't make it today, but he had asked about fermenting green coffee, and if that's a good thing, if that's a bad thing, like what about it? And it's a really interesting concept. So we talk a lot about fermentation at the farm level for fresh fruit, but there's a bit of a, I don't want to call it a trend because it's just like a small handful of people curious about it or trying it, but where they'll buy the coffee and then so the coffee's been processed, dried, milled, it's green coffee, it's sold, it's shipped to its final destination, and then when it gets to the final customer, it will be rehydrated and like re-fermented as green coffee to change the flavor, to do something. And the question was like, is this a good way to add value? And I think it's a complicated question because we're talking about a method. We're talking about a method of processing, a method of doing coffee. So it's just a tool. So like I'm pretty agnostic about tools, but it's like, how can you use them? So I could see them being used in very nefarious ways where it would allow somebody to buy the cheapest coffee, the cheapest, most commodity coffee from whatever, public market they can find, bring it to their roastery or bring it to their destination and then re-ferment it and then say they've added the value. And now the consumer is buying very expensive coffee. Maybe they're buying, $15, $20, $30 a pound for this really nice coffee. But the producer, the person who put like the lion's share of, having the land, growing this coffee, processing it, and shipping it across the world, gets even less because most of the value is now being added at the very end. So it's very similar to the idea of buying, really cheap, low quality coffee and then adding a bunch of cream and sugar and flavored syrups and, paying $12 for a latte or something like that. So there's ways in which this can be used in a really negative way. So I'm not a big fan, and I don't love, like Nick was showing me videos of just like Instagram influencers getting like, I don't know, 200 grams of green coffee and fermenting it and being like, this is so innovative and like wild and like adding yeast and doing all of these like chemistry experiments. It feels like we're really pulling away from the core of what would make coffee better and what would help the most number of people. However, I have heard about this method being used in a positive way, which there was a person who came to an FTC from Ecuador, and she was an exporter, a consolidator, and she was saying that for her, it allows her to pay better prices to producers to aggregate a lot of coffee, and then she, as the exporter, is improving it by fermenting the green coffee, and then she can therefore sell it as well. So it's not that it's a good or bad method, it's where along the chain is this method being applied. So for her, it allowed her to pay more for that coffee. Producers got better compensated for coffee that was not necessarily specialty at the time of purchasing it because they could convert it into specialty. But I could also see it being used very negatively, where it makes producers have even less money, and then more money stays on the consumer side, on the other part of the value chain. So I think that my request to people is to think about, if you see something like, when you see these tools, to not think about, is it bad or is it good? It's saying, like, where is this being applied and what are the consequences of this application? Are people being taken advantage of, or are people benefiting? And if they are benefiting, who is benefiting? So it's a topic that I've thought about for an episode because it's fermenting green coffee. But I'm very nervous about, like, lacking context, or somebody looking at that episode or getting tips and saying, oh, now I can ferment green coffee. Like, I don't want to give people a recipe to do it, but I do think it's an interesting tool that can be used much better, but then it's like, it could definitely be abused. So I don't know. I'm still kind of up in the air about how to use that. So I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on green coffee, or if you've seen any of these videos or whatever. Edbert.
I just joined yesterday. I'm actually a UC Davis alum as well. It's been cool to absorb everything that you've been discussing. But it was cool that you brought up that point. I just tried. I met some of the producers who came to San Francisco from Unblended, and Sebastian Ramirez was giving his talk on fermentation, right? As you were talking about, like that being a good gateway for a lot of people to introduce. And we were talking about that, but I was really interested in hearing about the recruitment lot that they were doing, where they were encouraging, to my understanding, they were encouraging young producers to have and bring their beans under, and then Sebastian, or a producer who's been doing it for a while, would do what you were saying, where they would do some sort of co-fermentation, sort of change the lot. But yeah, I mean, one of the things of me just sitting and being like a fly on the wall is hearing the other sides that as a consumer I don't necessarily get to hear about, is the effects of, like, I am on the end of, oh yeah, I have to have a washed coffee because sometimes anaerobic is too acidic, and then when I introduce it to friends, but then not seeing that. I'm interested in seeing more of, like, the effects, as you're saying, on the global scale, right? On the effects on the producers themselves. I'm very interested because I was just in the Philippines and talking with the roasters and some of the producers there, and how the culture is different there, because now it's not just Arabica, but then too, it's like, okay, how does the Philippines culture, and do we go after what other countries are doing, right? Do we follow the plug and play method, or do we change to try and make it like an Arabica, or do we try and just premiere the blends of Liberica and Robusta? So it's just cool to see that, but I didn't think about the effect of, yeah, it's truly encouraging the producers, and I didn't give thought to the positive aspect that you just mentioned, that it could be, the recruitment lot, that it could be encouraging people to take a stab at processing, hopefully with the goal at a later period to transition into. Um, I just wanted to introduce myself and just take a stab at that, what you just shared there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I there's actually a lot of things I want to say about your comments. One of them is this concept of, I was talking about this recently and I described it as like the snake eating its tail, where what I'm seeing is, let's say we have a roaster and a buyer who has access to all kinds of fermentation or all kinds of, creative ideas, beer yeast or lactic fermentation through whatever. And they, of course, have to go source coffee. So they travel to a producing country. They have a customer that they work with. And then they say, hey, I have this beer yeast. You should try this. Or I saw this thing in like this other food, like other food industry. You should try that. You should do some sous vide coffee fermentation or something like that. And then the producer's like, okay, my customer's asking for this, are going to buy the coffee. Sure. And then they try it. And maybe it turns out well, maybe it doesn't. That's not the point. The point is like a producer did this thing and now this coffee is for sale. So now some other roaster says, oh, look at what producers are doing. Producers are doing these, innovative fermentations, these innovative processing. We should support producers and we should buy this type of coffee or keep asking for this type of coffee. And I think that there's like this like disconnect where I'm seeing a lot of buyers thinking that this is like organically from producers and the way to support producers is to have this kind of coffee. But they're the ones who implanted that idea. The buyers and the roasters went to Origin and said, you should do this. And then producers did it. And now people are like, look, producers are organically coming up with these ideas. Let's support them. And I just want to say that like, no, they're not. Producers, like no producer in like the bottom of their heart was like, I wonder what a sous vide coffee would taste like. No one's like, I wonder if I put in pineapple into my fermentation. That was an outsider idea that was like infected into producers. And now some of them are doing that, but that's not the origin of the concept. So that's just to kind of point out that there's like this idea of like authenticity or this concept of like, these ideas are like where they're coming from is the only thing I'm trying to point out there, that it's not as genuine. Like most producers are just trying to survive. They're just working on volume. Like they're just, they're not sitting around dreaming up ideas of how to do like weird fermentations. Like that's just like hardly anybody's lived experience. So that was one thing I wanted to say about that. The other part of that is what you mentioned, like it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, is like when you have a funky coffee, you very quickly graduate out of that. You very quickly are like, okay, I get that. And that's the problem with making these really loud singular coffees, is that they're so one note that they get your attention, but they're very boring quickly because it's just the one note. Whereas when you have a coffee that is classic and balanced and complex and nothing sticks out, it's much harder to get bored with that. It's like listening to a symphony instead of just like the drums. It's like there's so much depth to these coffees. So my point to producers is, sure, you can do this, get people's attention, but then they're going to graduate out and want that classic coffee. So what if we just skip that middle part? What if we just skip the middle part where you make a crazy coffee? Like, let's just keep making the classic coffee because that's where we're going to end up anyway. So my goal with working with my clients, or just like my message to most producers, is like, if this is a stepping stone to somewhere else, do we have to go through this path? Can't we just go to the finish line and not waste our time in this like craziness? Like, let's just go to where the people want to be. Like, if you make a classic complex coffee that's not crazy or funky, like you will have customers for that. People will want that. So like make that and then just be there ready to welcome them. Versus I feel like a lot of the newer producers are trying to anticipate the trends and what are people going to want next. And they're kind of like pushing the crowd in. They're like, how do we push the crowd this way? How do we get them to like this thing? And my philosophy with my clients is like, just make the thing and have people come to you instead of trying to push them and make them like get there. And I think that is one of the, how do I say this? I love Lucas and Sofia Cuadros of Unblended. Like they are just really cool people. I love their project in Colombia. They're really trying to get like the youth involved in like the next generation of coffee, which is sorely needed. But I feel like that's kind of one of the trappings of youth, is the like excitement and the like distraction, and it feels very young to me to take that approach. So I would just, coffee industry needs everybody. But so like I said, when I work with my clients, I just try to avoid that step and just go to that classic place, because I'm like, people are going to want those coffees. I don't know if was there anything else that you were wanting to, the varieties. So you were talking about Arabica and Liberica and Robusta. I love Liberica. Nick and I traveled to Indonesia and Vietnam, where we were able to try a lot of specialty Robustas and Libericas. And I am so excited to have a little bit more like variety and flavor, like just kind of opening up those opportunities. Also just genetic diversity. I think that's really exciting. So yeah, I think that one of the biggest mistakes is when people are working with Robusta and they're trying to like make it fit into the shoe of Arabica and saying like, because then that implies that Robusta is a lesser variety and it needs to like live up to Arabica, instead of being like, no, it's its own thing. It has its own identity. It has its own place. It belongs here too, just as it is. And with Liberica too. So I feel like it would definitely be a mistake to try and like shoehorn any of these other varieties or species into what Arabica is, because we have enough of that.
Yeah,
I could
actually, this
jump
brings
in.
up. Sorry, Flag. The video that your most recent video where you said that clean sweet uniform, right?
Uh-huh.
And then there's maybe the point system. I think it's interesting because when I was talking with some of the roasters and producers in the Philippines, one of those things is does it fit into the point system? Right? Like these farms are considering, hey, how do we grade America on the standard that has been skewed mainly for, and so I kind of want to hear your thing on and if they are focusing, like you can see with some of the producers in some of the articles I was reading, they were saying, yeah, we know what our products are, and we're having a pride in focusing on those efforts, and we're devaluing, like for themselves, the point system, like having to meet that. What are your thoughts on that, especially for something that doesn't necessarily, like we're saying, with isn't like the scale isn't necessarily standardized for that market or for that variety.
Yeah, I think that, the point system worked for a little bit, but very quickly it stopped working. Very quickly it was more a tool for punishment than a tool to like understand coffee. And I think that one of the things that is a huge disappointment for me of the coffee industry is people realizing the point system doesn't work very well. It doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't really describe coffees. It's kind of the concept I was talking about earlier too, of like, instead of coming up with a new solution, it's like, let's double down. So a lot of people said, okay, the point system doesn't completely capture this coffee. It doesn't really describe it. We need more points. Let's redo the cupping sheet, and then we're going to get more attributes, and now we're going to do points, but we're going to do intensities. Like they just doubled down in this one direction that wasn't working, instead of, having any kind of creativity and saying like, no points. It's not that the points were wrong. It's not that more people need to learn the points. It's that the points is a bad system and we should have no points, because then you have what you're doing. It's like, okay, we've trained everybody to this one standard, and if you have anything outside of that, it's immediately punished. It's immediately not good, or it's immediately undervalued, not valued. Whereas we can create a system, again, like I don't think that we need to have, because then they did, okay, now Robusta has its own point score, and now they're going to make one for Liberica, and everybody needs to have their own point score. And then producers feel really overwhelmed because they're like, I barely learned this system. Now I have to learn this system, and now I have to learn this system. And again, it keeps more people from participating and moving forward as you create more barriers of like, you have to learn this system or this score, like, I don't know, system. Sorry, guys. And the point is that the question, like, we haven't questioned how we purchased coffee, because the thing is, the point system is for the outsider. It's for someone to say, your coffee is only 80 points, so I will only pay this, instead of allowing the producer to say, this is my cost of production. My coffee costs this. This is what my coffee cost. Because this is what I need to survive. And no points are necessary for that. It's like, you taste it, do you like it? We move on. So like, there hasn't been enough of an examination of how messed up the point system is. Like, it's such a colonizer's tool. And we all think, oh, no, it's just like we need to sharpen the tool. We need to refine the tool. We need to like make it like, no, no tool. Anyway, sorry, I was rambling. I don't know if that answers anything.
I could, if I could jump in, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Yemeni coffee shops in the US have just taken off. Like they're just all over the place now. And what happens in the Yemeni coffee shops is that you get about 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 options for what you could drink. And Yemenis historically, cascara was coffee. Like that is what they drank. They sold the bean and they really enjoyed the cascara. And that was what coffee was in Yemen, like for most people. It still today is that. And, it's an extraordinary miss for, I think, the world not to kind of be learning about like the pleasures of cascara and the spicy, rich, sweet options that are available. And, so you can go into these Yemeni coffee shops and learn a lot, and you can see, I mean, that's totally off the point system, like the cascara taste. But like, maybe there's a learning opportunity. I was just thinking about, I don't know if your name is Ed down there in Indonesia, in the Philippines, you were saying, looking at Liberia and like, is cascara ever like an option, a possibility for, your growers? Like, anyway, so
Yeah, I just wanted to
that's
jump in
just,
about that, where there is such an opportunity with these other parts of coffee, like the cascara. For anyone who's listening and you're not sure what cascara is, it's the peel. It's another like part of the fruit. And I have had some incredible cascara teas when I was in Japan, and they were so, like you said, spicy, sweet, like very complex, super interesting. And it's just part of the fruit that in coffee we throw away because we care about the seed. So it's like, 40% of the weight, and it just gets thrown away. And so there is a desire economically for a producer to capture some of that value. There's a desire from consumers to taste something else that's different. The issue that I've seen, especially in Central America, is that when you have a country that is really efficient in wet processing, then the cascara is really an afterthought. And so there have been producers that have tried to like kind of rescue that cascara and send it, and then they just have been punished by other countries like the UK because of its mold content, because it was not cared for. So it's one of these things that like it sounds easy enough, but it really is a whole other industry. And so what I've seen is that coffee producers are like barely keeping their head above water, just processing coffee. And a lot of times people are like, oh, well, just sell the cascara. That should be money. But it's like that's a whole other industry. It's like you're a hamburger shop and people are like, okay, well, just start selling ice cream. You're like, but I need different refrigerators and I need a different kitchen and I need different, like I can't just start selling ice cream if I'm doing burgers. And so I think people underestimate the infrastructure and the knowledge that would go into, because when you have the cascara, you have a lot of moisture. You've got the highest sugar and the wettest part of the fruit. And so the most microbially attractive and the most prone to spoilage in these like very tropical environments, like lots of warmth and moisture. And coffee mills are not very hygienic places. They've never had to be. So now it's like you're trying to process, pharmaceutical grade material in just like the jungle. It's not an adequate place for it. So a lot of people have failed to make it work. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. It's just that there's like that missing middle of having the knowledge of microbial stability, so that you don't just have like a mold factory, of even having the tools to be able to test it, because producers don't have tools. Everything's done by eyeball and by like feel. And for these tools, the cascara is important, because then you drink that thing, you put that in hot water, and then you ingest it. So the threshold for safety for human consumption is much higher versus coffee. Coffee doesn't need to be that hygienic because it goes through a roasting step. There's a natural like pasteurization step that like sanitizes the coffee, and then we brew it. And so it's safe. So a lot of places like never have had to be that clean. But if you're going to do cascara, you have to be really clean. And so we don't have the culture of cleaning to do the thing. So I just wanted to say that if as a consumer, if you find the cascara, maybe ask a few more questions about where it came from and how it was produced. And as a producer, be a little bit wary because the standards are very different. It's not just as simple as like, oh, just dry your cascara into a tea and, sell it to someplace. I know a lot of producers. One of my previous clients who was given that idea by a buyer, they got really excited. They're like, this is usually our waste. I'm going to recapture it. And they have spent 16 months with all of this cascara in storage trying to find a buyer, and they're just not able to get rid of this material. So now it's probably going to be compost, but they've spent the space to store it. They had the bags to store it. They had all of the like missed opportunity cost of like trying to get somebody to buy it, and then it just was like a mess. So it's a really challenging path. Another one, which I will not talk about, maybe next time we can talk about, but people that want to make alcohol from the fermentation liquid, trying to do like distillates, like there's a lot of ideas to capture value. The actual execution is incredibly challenging. So if you guys want to talk about distillates and like alcohol from these fermentations next time, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks everybody for joining. Sorry, I just saw the time. Thanks for joining. Thanks for hanging out. We do this every other Friday now that harvest is over and Nick and I are back on track. So hope to see you guys again soon. And in the meantime, you can absolutely hang out in the chat. Paolo, good to